The old church. Every disappearance has been within a 5-block radius. But that church has been abandoned for years, Emma said, frowning. Maybe not as abandoned as we thought, Jack muttered, and we need to check it out. As they approached the dilapidated church, the temperature seemed to drop. Frost crept up the broken windows, and the wind carried the faint sound of jingling bells. Jack, Emma whispered, her hand on her gun, you ever get the feeling you're walking into a trap? Before Jack could answer, a blood-curdling scream split the air. They rushed inside, weapons ready. The interior of the church was a nightmare of twisted Christmas decorations. Garlands of barbed wire hung from the rafters, and the pews were lined with leering nutcracker dolls. At the altar stood Krampus, towering and terrible, with Miss Miller and her daughter Jill bound at his cloven hooves. Well, well, the creature growled, its voice like gravel and ice. The hunter returns. Jack raised his shotgun. Let them go, Krampus. Your quarrel's with me. Krampus laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. Oh, but the fun's just beginning, old man. 7 sins to go. With a crack of its whip, Krampus vanished in a swirl of snow, leaving behind only the echo of its laughter and a pile of coal where the mother and daughter were. December 18th, night 6. The town was in a state of panic. 4 more disappearances in 2 nights, each victim seemingly random. Jack and Emma worked tirelessly, trying to protect the townspeople while unraveling the mystery. There's something we're missing, Jack muttered, poring over his research. Krampus said 7 sins. What does that mean? Emma, who was pinning up photos of the missing, paused. Jack, look at this. All the victims. They're connected to the old church somehow. Jack's eyes widened as the realization hit him. Son of a bitch, it's not random at all. Krampus is punishing them for something that happened in that church. As if on cue, the lights flickered. A cold wind swept through the office, carrying the scent of peppermint and brimstone. Well done, Hunter, Krampus's voice echoed around them. But can you stop what's already been set in motion? Jack grabbed his weapon, but the presence was already gone. Emma, we need to evacuate the town. Now. December 20th, night 8. The evacuation was chaos. Many refused to leave, not believing in the supernatural threat. Those who did flee found their cars wouldn't start, as if the very machines were conspiring against them. Jack stood in the town square watching as dark clouds gathered overhead. Snow began to fall, but each flake burned where it touched skin. Emma, he said, his voice heavy, I need to tell you something. About why Krampus is really here. But before he could continue, a scream cut through the air. They turned to see a young woman being dragged into the shadows by a creature that looked like a twisted parody of an elf. Its skin was a sickly green, its eyes glowing red, and its teeth sharp as needles. Go! Jack yelled, pushing Emma towards the victim. I'll hold it off! As Emma rushed to help, Jack faced the monster. All right, you ugly son of a bitch, let's dance. The elf, a grotesque creature with pointed ears and razor-sharp teeth, lunged at Jack. Its movements were unnaturally quick, its clawed hands slashing through the air. Jack ducked, feeling the wind of the attack ruffle his hair. He swung his shotgun, catching the elf in the midsection. The creature stumbled back, releasing the woman, hissing in pain and rage. Jack pumped the shotgun and fired, the rock salt round tearing into the elf's shoulder. Meanwhile, Emma had reached the young woman. She was trying to pull her to safety when a dark shadow fell over them. Emma looked up to see Krampus looming above, its eyes blazing with hellfire. Jack, Emma shouted, her voice tight with fear. Jack turned, his eyes widening as he saw Krampus. The demon towered over them all, its massive form blocking out what little light remained in the square. You meddle in affairs beyond your understanding, Hunter, Krampus growled, its voice like grinding stone. The elf, sensing its master's presence, renewed its attack on Jack with frenzied vigor. Jack found himself fighting on 2 fronts, trying to keep the elf at bay while also positioning himself between Krampus and Emma. Krampus raised its chain, the links glowing with unholy fire. With a flick of its wrist, it sent the chain whipping towards Emma and the young woman. Jack dove, tackling them both out of the way. The chain struck the ground where they had been, leaving a smoking crater in the pavement. Emma, get her out of here! Jack yelled, rolling to his feet and facing Krampus. Emma nodded, helping the terrified woman up and hurrying her towards the nearest building. Jack stood alone against Krampus and its elf. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small pouch. "Let's see how you like this, you Christmas reject," he muttered, tossing the contents at Krampus. A cloud of powder exploded in Krampus's face. The demon roared in pain, clawing at its eyes. Jack allowed himself a grim smile. The mixture of salt, holy water, and blessed herbs was an old hunter's trick, but it still packed a punch. Taking advantage of Krampus's distraction, Jack turned his attention back to the elf. The creature was circling him, looking for an opening. Jack feinted left, then swung his shotgun like a club, catching the elf on the side of its head. The elf staggered, momentarily stunned. Jack pressed his advantage, tackling the creature to the ground. They grappled in the snow, which hissed and steamed where it touched Jack's skin. Jack managed to get his hands around the elf's throat, squeezing with all his might. The creature thrashed and clawed at him, leaving deep scratches on his arms and face. But Jack held on, gritting his teeth against the pain. Suddenly, a massive hand closed around Jack's collar, lifting him off the elf. Krampus had recovered and now held Jack aloft, its eyes burning with fury. "Enough of this," Krampus snarled. It began to squeeze and Jack felt his breath leaving him. Just then, a gunshot rang out. Krampus roared in pain, dropping Jack. Emma stood a few yards away, her service weapon smoking in her hands. "Get away from him, you goat-faced bastard," she shouted, firing again. The bullets seemed to do little damage to Krampus, but they were enough of a distraction for Jack to scramble away. He scooped up his shotgun, aiming it at the demon. Krampus, realizing it was outmatched for the moment, snarled in frustration. It grabbed the young woman who had been trying to crawl away unnoticed. Before Jack or Emma could react, Krampus touched the woman's forehead. In an instant, she turned to coal, crumbling to the ground in a lifeless heap. "No," Jack cried out, firing his shotgun. But Krampus was already fading, disappearing in a swirl of black snow. The elf, seeing its master retreat, tried to follow, but Emma was quicker. She emptied her clip into the creature, each shot finding its mark. The elf jerked and twitched before finally collapsing, its body dissolving into a puddle of foul-smelling ichor. Jack and Emma stood in the suddenly quiet square, breathing heavily. The snow continued to fall, but now it was just ordinary snow, cold and wet. "You okay?" Jack asked, limping over to Emma. She nodded, her face pale. "Yeah, but that woman... Jack, what are we dealing with here?" Jack looked at the pile of coal that had once been a person, his expression grim. "Something way out of our league, Emma, and it's only going to get worse." As they made their way back to the sheriff's office, Jack knew that time was running out. Krampus was growing stronger, and they were no closer to stopping it. The real battle was yet to come, and Jack wasn't sure if they were ready for it. December 22nd, night 10. The town was a war zone. Christmas lights flickered like warning beacons, and the constant jingling of Krampus's bells kept everyone on edge. Half the population was missing, taken by Krampus or his minions. In the sheriff's office, now their base of operations, Jack prepared for a ritual he hoped would banish Krampus. "Are you sure about this?" Emma asked, worry etched on her face. Jack nodded grimly. "No, but it's the only shot we've got." As the clock struck midnight, Jack began the incantation. The room filled with an eerie light, and for a moment, it seemed to be working. Then, with a roar that shook the building, Krampus appeared. It looked at the ritual setup and laughed. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Hunter? You, of all people, should know the price of meddling with forces beyond your control." With a wave of its clawed hand, Krampus shattered the ritual circle. The backlash sent Jack flying across the room, crashing into a wall. As he slipped into unconsciousness, he heard Emma's scream and Krampus's mocking laughter. December 23rd, night 11, Jack awoke to a town in ruins. The sky was perpetually dark, and the snow that fell was black as coal. He limped through the streets, calling for Emma, but there was no response. In the town square, he found a note pinned to the Christmas tree with one of Krampus's birch twigs. 11 sins accounted for, one remains. Will you be the final sacrifice, Hunter, or will you doom them all? The choice is yours. Midnight, the old church. Jack crumpled the note in his fist, his father's old hunter's ring heavy on his finger. He knew what he had to do, but first, he needed to face the truth he'd been running from for so long. He made his way to the abandoned church, each step heavy with memory and guilt. Inside, the smell of old wood and forgotten prayers mingled with the lingering scent of smoke from a fire long extinguished. In what was once his father's office, Jack found a hidden compartment he'd discovered as a child. Inside lay a dusty leather-bound book, his father's hunter's journal. With trembling hands, he opened it to an entry from 50 years ago. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. December 23, 1970. Jack's been acting out. I fear my duties as both pastor and hunter have left him feeling neglected. Must make more time for him after Christmas. The next entry, dated December 24th, was in a different hand. The church deacons. Tragedy strikes fire engulfs church during Christmas Eve service. 11 dead, including Pastor Michael Winters. Sole survivor, Jack Winters, age 10, cause unknown. Jack closed the journal, memories washing over him. The ritual he'd found in his father's occult books, the Latin words he'd stumbled through, candles flickering as he sought to teach his father a lesson. The sudden chill that had swept through the church, and then the flames, the screams, the horror on his father's face as he realized what Jack had done. He'd run away that night, leaving behind everything, including his name. He'd become a hunter to atone for his sin, following in his father's footsteps, but it had never been enough. Now back in the present day, as the clock ticked towards midnight and Christmas Eve, Jack understood. Krampus hadn't been randomly summoned to Pine Creek. It had been called by him 50 years ago, a child's misguided spell fueled by anger and loneliness. In the distance, bells began to jingle, a sound he'd first heard that fateful Christmas Eve. Krampus was coming to collect on the bargain Jack had unwittingly struck. And Jack Winters, once a scared little boy, now a grizzled old hunter, prepared to face his final judgment. He picked up his father's journal and shotgun. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered to the empty church. "I'll make this right." As Jack stepped out into the snowy night, he knew that this time he wouldn't run. This time he'd face the consequences of his actions, no matter the cost. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The old church loomed before Jack, its spire a dark silhouette against the starless sky. Snow fell in heavy flakes, each one black as coal, covering the ground in a sinister blanket. The air was thick with the scent of pine and brimstone, and the distant jingling of bells grew ever closer. Jack stood at the church steps, his shotgun loaded with rock salt in one hand, a flask of holy water in the other. His breath came out in ragged puffs, visible in the frigid air. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew there was nowhere left to hide. As the clock tower struck midnight, the church doors creaked open of their own accord. Jack steeled himself and stepped inside. The interior was transformed. Twisted garlands of thorns and bones hung from the rafters. The pews were filled with coal statues, each one bearing the face of a taken townsperson. At the altar stood Krampus, massive and terrible, its eyes glowing like embers in the gloom. "Welcome home, Jack Winters," Krampus growled, its voice echoing through the church. "Or should I say little Jackie, the boy who played with fire?" Jack raised his shotgun. "Let them go, Krampus. This is between you and me." Krampus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but they're here because of you, Hunter. Your guilt, your sin, it called to me. 11 souls to match the 11 you killed, and now on the 12th night we complete the circle." From the shadows emerged Emma, her eyes blank and unseeing. She moved like a puppet on strings, coming to stand beside Krampus. "Emma!" Jack cried out, taking a step forward. Krampus's hand shot out, wrapping around Emma's throat. One more step and she joins the others." Jack froze, his mind racing. "What do you want from me?" "Confession," Krampus hissed. "Admit your sin, face your guilt." Jack's grip on his shotgun tightened. "You want a confession? Fine. I started the fire. I found my father's occult books hidden in his office. Thought I could use them to get back at him. Stupid kid playing with forces I didn't understand. The ritual candles, the Latin words I could barely pronounce. When everything started burning, I ran. I left them all to die." Tears streamed down Jack's face as 50 years of pent-up guilt poured out. "I've spent my whole life trying to make up for it. Hunting monsters, saving people, but it was never enough. Nothing could bring them back." Krampus nodded, a cruel smile spreading across its face. "Yes, feel the weight of your sin. But confession isn't enough. There must be punishment." The demon raised its bundle of birch twigs, ready to strike Emma. "No!" Jack shouted. Take me instead. I'm the one who sinned. I'm the one who should be punished." Krampus paused, considering. "A noble offer, but are you willing to pay the price, to take her place in my realm for eternity?" Jack looked at Emma, then at the coal statues of the townspeople. He thought of all the lives he'd saved as a hunter, and all the ones he couldn't. He thought of a scared little boy, running from a burning church. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I am." Krampus grinned, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Then let it be done." The demon released Emma, who collapsed to the ground. Jack dropped his weapons and walked forward, head held high. As Krampus raised its birch twigs, Jack closed his eyes, ready to accept his fate, but the blow never came. Instead, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the church. Jack's eyes snapped open to see Emma, her hands shaking, but her aim true, her service weapon smoking. "Get away from him," Emma shouted, her voice trembling but determined. Krampus roared in pain and fury, turning its attention to Emma. Jack seized the moment, diving for his discarded shotgun. "Emma, duck!" Jack yelled, pumping the shotgun and firing a round of rock salt at Krampus. The demon staggered, caught between Emma's bullets and Jack's salt rounds. It lashed out with its chain, narrowly missing Emma as she rolled behind a pew. "Jack," Emma called out, "we can't keep this up forever. How do we stop this thing?" Before Jack could answer, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "With a little help, I think." Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly ritualist they had been trying to reach, stood in the doorway, her eyes glinting with knowledge far beyond her years. A faint, swirling mist clung to her ankles, dissipating as she stepped into the church. Krampus roared in fury. "You dare interfere, old woman?" Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, unfazed. "Oh, I dare, Jack. Your confession was the first step, but there's more to be done." Jack looked at her, confused. "Abernathy, how did you—" "No time for that now, dear," she cut him off, her eyes darting to the shadows as if watching for something unseen. "We need to complete the ritual. Your willingness to sacrifice yourself has weakened Krampus's hold, but we need to sever it completely." Krampus, sensing the threat, lunged towards them. Jack instinctively raised his shotgun, firing a round of rock salt that momentarily staggered the demon. As Mrs. Abernathy explained the ritual, Emma provided cover fire, keeping Krampus at bay. Her shots were precise, targeting the demon's eyes and joints, slowing its advance. Mrs. Abernathy quickly drew a symbol on the floor with chalk. "Jack, we need something personal, tied to your guilt. Quickly!" Jack nodded, pulling out the old newspaper clipping about the church fire 50 years ago. Krampus, recovering, sent a wave of black snow swirling towards them. Mrs. Abernathy muttered something under her breath, and the snow parted around them, unable to penetrate an invisible barrier. "Jack," Emma called out between shots, "whatever you're going to do, do it fast." As Jack stood in the center of Mrs. Abernathy's chalk symbol, Emma emptied her clip into Krampus, buying them precious seconds. "You must admit your wrongdoing, Jackie, and seek forgiveness not only from the people that died, but yourself too." Then Mrs. Abernathy began to chant in some forgotten language. As Jack began to bare his conscience, Krampus howled in rage. It sent a wave of black snow swirling towards them. Mrs. Abernathy deflected most of it, but some got through. Emma, out of ammunition, grabbed a tall club-like candlestick from the altar, swinging it at the shards of ice flying towards them. "Keep going, Jack," Emma shouted, her voice hoarse. "We've got your back." Torn between the ritual and helping his friends, Jack closed his eyes, forcing himself to focus. "Everyone, please forgive me." He hesitated for a moment. "I forgive myself," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. As the ritual neared its end, Krampus made a final desperate lunge. Emma threw herself in its path, using the candlestick to deflect its claws. She cried out in pain as one claw raked her arm, but she held her ground. "Finish it, Jack," Emma yelled through gritted teeth with a final declaration. "Please forgive me, Father." Jack completed the ritual. A blinding light filled the church, and Krampus let out an ear-splitting shriek as he began to dissolve. Once he disappeared, the coal figures turned back to their living forms. In the aftermath, Jack rushed to Emma's side. "You okay?" he asked, examining her wounded arm. Emma managed a weak smile. "Nothing a bottle of whiskey and some bandages won't fix." "We did it, Jack. We really did it." After ensuring she was okay, Jack turned to Mrs. Abernathy. How did you know what to do?" The old woman smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say I've had some experience with forces that bend reality." As they helped the dazed townspeople out of the church, Jack looked at Mrs. Abernathy and Emma. "I couldn't have done this without either of you. Thank you." Mrs. Abernathy smiled mysteriously. "This was your victory, Jack. You faced your past and came out stronger. But remember, in this line of work, it's good to have friends." Emma nodded in agreement. "Partners," she corrected, extending her uninjured hand to Jack. As they stepped out into the now peaceful night, Jack felt the weight of 50 years lifting from his shoulders. He wasn't running anymore. He was home, and he wasn't alone. As they stepped out into the night, the black snow had turned white again. The stars were visible, twinkling brightly in the clear sky. In the distance, church bells began to ring, welcoming Christmas Day. "Merry Christmas, Jack," Mrs. Abernathy said with a smile. "And do be careful of any strange mists that roll in." With that cryptic warning, she turned and walked away into the dark night. And for the first time in 50 years, Jack felt at peace.